all so much for joining us to celebrate Do All the Good You Can, How Faith Shaped Hillary Rodham Clinton's Politics. My name is Heather, and I'm the Senior Publicity Manager at the University of Illinois Press, and I'm just going to go over some brief logistical information and introduce our guests before we get started. First of all, thank you so much to our panelists for being here today. They're going to talk for about 45 minutes, and then we will have time for a 15-minute Q&A at the end. You can enter questions throughout the event by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. A 40% off discount code and a link to the book on our website will be found in the chat box. I'll put it in there after I'm done talking. And then we will also be recording the event and posting it on our YouTube channel afterwards. You'll receive an email from Zoom after the event that will have both the discount code and a link to our YouTube channel as well. And now I will just briefly introduce our guests. Gary Scott Smith is an ordained Presbyterian minister who serves as a parish associate and the director of the mission program at St. Andrew's Covenant Presbyterian Church in Wilmington, North Carolina. He is Emeritus Professor of History at Grove City College in Western Pennsylvania, where he taught from 1978 to 2017, and chaired the History Department and coordinated the Humanities Corps. Smith is the editor of 18 books, including Do All the Good You Can, How Faith Shaped Hillary Rodham Clinton's Politics. His op-eds have appeared in the Washington Post, Newsweek, USA Today, and other major newspapers and magazines. For 5 years, he served as the president of the Christian Assistance Network in Grove City. Smith was also named Volunteer of the Year by the Grove City Area United Way in 2017, and that year also received the Omicron Delta Kappa Cheryl M. Hogel Distinguished Service Award. A prize-winning historian and Emmy Award nominee, Randall Balmer holds the John Phillips Chair in Religion at Dartmouth, the oldest endowed professorship at Dartmouth College. Dr. Balmer has published widely in both scholarly journals and in the popular press, and he has appeared frequently on network television, on NPR, and on both the Colbert Report and The Daily Show. He is the author of multiple books, including Passion Plays, How Religion Shaped Sports in North America. His second book, Mine Eyes Have Seen the Glory, A Journey into the Evangelical Subculture in America, now in its 5th edition, was made into an award-winning 3-part documentary for PBS. Dr. Balmer wrote and hosted that series, as well as a 2-part series on creationism and a documentary on Billy Graham. And now, without further ado, I will turn it over to our panelists. Thanks again to everyone for being here today.
Thank you, Heather, and good to see you, Professor Smith. Gary, if I may, we're here to talk about your remarkable new book, Do All the Good You Can, How Faith Shaped Hillary Rodham Clinton's Politics, just out from University of Illinois Press. And it's really a wonderful and remarkable book. I learned a lot in reading it. And so Gary and I are going to have a conversation about that as we proceed this hour. Gary, I have to say, well, first of all, I think you are a candidate to begin your own Book of the Month club. That is, books you publish. You've been remarkably prolific throughout your career and even now into retirement. And I have to say, I was a little surprised that you would take up a biography of Hillary Rodham Clinton. How did you come to that decision?
Well, first of all, let me say thank you to Heather for organizing this event, and thank you to Randall for being willing to be the host. Well, several things impacted my decision to write this particular book. I had previously written 3 religious biographies, one of Winston Churchill, one of Mark Twain, and one of Jackie Robinson. And frankly, had a lot of fun writing those books. They were quite different from each other. But I enjoyed the research, I enjoyed the writing process, I enjoyed reflecting upon how religion shaped the lives of these important individuals. And that really prompted me to think about Hillary Clinton. I hadn't done a religious biography of a woman, and I thought it would be interesting to do one of a woman. And arguably, love her or hate her, Hillary is one of the most important women in the world in the 20th and 21st centuries. She has had a tremendous impact through a wide variety of roles that she's played, which I describe in the book. So there was that, her importance. Secondly, there was the fact that I felt like scholars and the media had not paid sufficient attention to her religious convictions and how they shaped particularly her public persona and her policies in governance. So I thought that story needed to be told more fully. Ironically, I have a colleague, former colleague at Grove City College, Paul Kengor, who had written a religious biography of Hillary, but it came out in 2006. And about half of what I talk about in the book occurs after 2006. So I thought the story needed to be completed. Paul's a political scientist. I'm a religious historian like you. And so we come at the subject from a rather different perspective. Also, he's a political conservative. I would consider myself to be a political moderate. So our approaches were somewhat different in regard to evaluating her career and how religion impacted her. So the central argument of the book is that religion, her own personal faith, which has been prevalent in her life since she was in a youth group in a Methodist church, well, before that, even Sunday school as a younger child, has had a definite and significant impact upon her life in terms of how she has played a wide variety of roles and how she has dealt with problems in her life, such as Bill's infidelity and the devastating loss of the 2016 election. So the book, anyway, deals a great deal with how religious principles, how her convictions, how her personal relationship with God affects every aspect of her life from childhood to today.
Well, you make that case persuasively, and I want to congratulate you. It was a remarkably even-handed treatment of her life and career. I thought it was really eminently fair, and I think readers would find it to be that fair a treatment. Let's talk a little bit about her background, her upbringing. She comes across in the book as an overachiever from her earliest days. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. She was raised by parents who basically taught her that you can be anything you want to be. You can do anything you want to do. Don't be restricted by the fact that you're a woman. You've got gifts, use them. And that emerges in junior high and in high school. Not surprisingly, she was voted most likely to succeed by her high school class of 1,000 members in Chicago area. She was active in student government there. She goes on to Wellesley College, and there she is president of the student government again. So the first and second time she was president of a governing body. And basically she goes to Yale Law School. She's a superstar there. She works for the Children's Defense Fund. She's part of the Judiciary Committee that's investigating the impeachment of Richard Nixon, goes to Arkansas and is the first, second female professor at the University of Arkansas Law School and first person to become an associate at Rose Law Firm in Little Rock, the third oldest firm in the United States. And on it goes. I mean, I think people know she has a major role she plays as First Lady of Arkansas. And then I think people have some general understanding of her role as First Lady of the United States, which arguably she was the most important First Lady in history. And then as a New York Senator, Secretary of State, presidential candidate, and a lot of other things that she's done behind the scenes with the Clinton Global Initiative and wide variety of other organizations she's participated in.
Let's talk a little bit about Don Jones.
Well, Don Jones had a tremendous impact upon Hillary's life. He was a graduate of Drew Theological Seminary, who came as the youth director of her church when she was in 9th grade. He only stayed 2 years, got ousted primarily because he was a little bit too theologically liberal for this fairly conservative United Methodist congregation. While those 2 years while he was there, he introduced Hillary to a wide variety of theologians and church historians and social activists. Took them to hear Martin Luther King Jr., Saul Alinsky, met with youth groups of Hispanics and African Americans. Basically, expanded her horizons well beyond this white suburb of Chicago where she lived, Park Ridge. But then after he left, they continued to be in contact all the way until he died in 2009. So he went on to become a professor at Drew University. And every time she was in a crisis in her life, she would turn to him. One key example was her freshman year at Wellesley. She almost dropped out because she was dealing with severe depression. And she counseled with him, and he encouraged her to stay, and she did. And, but throughout her life, whenever there was an issue that was pressing, like a theological issue, like how to deal with the death penalty, or a personal challenge that was confronting her, she would turn to John. They were together a fair amount, but mainly their correspondence was by phone and by letters.
So an enormous influence on her, and by extension, and this comes through emphatically in the book, Methodism is utterly central to understanding who Hillary Rodham Clinton was and is.
Oh, absolutely. You'd be hard pressed to identify another presidential candidate for whom association with a particular denomination was any more important. Jimmy Carter with the Southern Baptists, although of course he subsequently left that denomination, but Woodrow Wilson with the Presbyterian Church USA would be a couple of examples that would be close to hers. But she repeatedly says, not just I'm a Christian, but I'm a Methodist. And Methodism has profoundly affected me. Hence the title of the book, Do All the Good You Can, which is a shortened version of a statement attributed to John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, who basically said, we're on earth to do all the good we can, to all the people we can, in all the ways we can, to use all the talents and abilities we have to serve God. So I give lots of examples in the book of how Methodism guides and directs her, and how she even looked to an official Methodist handbook for guidance in terms of how to shape her views of public policies. And I couldn't, I've written about 22 presidents, and I couldn't think of an example of a president who looked to the denominational official handbook to guide them the way she looked to that handbook with Methodism. So yeah, she was profoundly influenced by the teachings of Wesley, the history of Methodism. She spoke to many Methodist groups. She has spoken to many Methodist groups during the course of her life. She's worshiped in Methodist churches and growing up, and in Little Rock, and in Foundry Methodist in Washington, D.C., a little church outside of north of New York City now. So yeah, Methodism has had a profound impact, and it's she's tried to balance the two Methodist influences of personal relationship with God, personal spirituality, with a kind of social gospel orientation of get out there and roll up your sleeves and do good and try to change the lives of people and make their social and material conditions better.
So in many ways, she's really a kind of 19th century evangelical, with some of the positions that she's staked out over the course of her political career. And you also chart how she moves from being a Goldwater girl in 1964 to becoming much more politically liberal, although not as politically liberal as many of her critics say she is. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, sure. In high school, you talked about her being an overachiever. One of the things she did was they had this debate between a male student and her in 1964. And the male student played Lyndon Johnson, and she played Barry Goldwater. And they had the debate in front of the entire student body. And then they had a vote afterwards of who you would vote for. And Goldwater got twice as many votes as Johnson. Now, part of that was probably the political climate at that particular high school. But part of it was undoubtedly the influential case that she made for Barry Goldwater. So she then, and of course, we know that in the national election, Goldwater didn't do so well in 1964. So right. She overachieved there as well. So she goes to Wellesley, and her freshman year, she's the president of Young Republicans. But she's gradually, she has this battle going on in her mind and her heart between what Don Jones had led her to think and do while she was in high school, and a social studies teacher named Paul Carlson, who was an arch conservative as was Hillary's father, Hugh. And so she's kind of torn between these two perspectives. But at Wellesley, she gradually moves more toward the moderate to liberal end of the spectrum. But even then, she goes to the 1968 Republican National Convention to try to support a last-ditch effort of Nelson Rockefeller to gain the nomination. But she campaigns for Eugene McCarthy, the Democrat who's trying to unseat Lyndon Johnson in the New Hampshire primary in 1968. So, she's all over the board. She's kind of a liberal Republican / conservative Democrat during her college years. Of course, then that pilgrimage continues until she firmly accepts the Democratic perspective.
You talk about what you call a conservative mind, liberal heart dilemma. What do you mean by that?
Well, she was touched by the kind of social issues that the Democratic Party was pursuing. And a lot of that was consonant with what the Methodist Church of the 1960s and early 1970s was promoting. So a concern about racism in American society, a concern about poverty, social injustice, concern a little bit about the environment. But, those kind of social issues became very important to her. She was exposed to poverty of children, even in high school, when there were migrant communities that were being established nearby where she lived out in the countryside. And Don Jones got her involved in volunteering and babysitting and doing things there. But philosophically, up until at least midway to late college, she's still buying more into a Republican mentality of smaller government, more focus on individual responsibility, more support of capitalist enterprise. So she asked the question several times in high school and in college, can one be a conservative mentally, but a liberal socially? And she asked Don Jones those questions. And eventually, I think she reconciles heart and head by moving more into mainstream Democratic position.
Okay. Let's move on to her time in Arkansas, where she becomes an extraordinarily influential first lady. And again, out of her convictions about the importance of public education and do all the good you can, she succeeds really in recasting public education in Arkansas.
Well, absolutely. There's a special initiative that's undertaken under Bill, her husband, as governor, to try to improve education in Arkansas. At this point, Arkansas is ranked very low in terms of educational attainment of students. So there's a definite need for improvement. So they create this ad hoc group, this campaign to improve education, and she heads it up, and she travels all around the state. She speaks to people. She promotes various policies, and a lot of it ends up being adopted and does, in fact, help improve the educational achievement of students in Arkansas at this time. And it's a very popular measure in Arkansas, and she gets a lot of good press from journalists and reporters, some of whom say that we elected the wrong Clinton governor of Arkansas. We should have elected Hillary. And prior to this point, she was kind of suspect in Arkansas because when she first married Bill, she didn't take his last name. She was a Midwesterner. To some, she was a little too hippie oriented. So there were those kinds of issues. And I talk in the book how after Bill and Hillary got married and they're living in Arkansas in 1976, they're really neither of them involved in the church very much. It's not until he loses his second campaign to be governor that it's kind of a wake-up call for both of them. And then Chelsea's born in 1980. And so they decide to get back into the church. And unlike many couples, they go different directions. He continues with his Southern Baptist roots, and he continues with the Methodist roots. And so they're part of different churches. But they both become very involved in their respective churches. And it has a big impact, I would argue, on both of their lives.
Okay. And then we move on to the 1992 election. Bill Clinton is elected president. Hillary is running somewhat to be a co-president over the course of the campaign, but there's such a huge backlash against that notion that she backs away from it. This is the campaign where the revelations about Jennifer Flowers begin to surface. And then Hillary Clinton becomes first lady and tries to do more or less on healthcare what she had done on public education in Arkansas, and it doesn't work. What happens?
Well, first of all, I make the case that she is arguably the most important first lady in the history of our country, everything considered, because of her political influence and because of this healthcare initiative that you mentioned, but also because she speaks out on a wide variety of issues. But she's also the most reviled first lady in American history, and I don't think there's much debate about that. But specifically, what she's trying to promote, and this starts early in Bill's first term, is essentially what we get under Obamacare. I mean, it's a universal health care. It's going to be free health care for people regardless of whether they have insurance or what their income is. And the time is not right. Plus, she handles it pretty poorly. She doesn't really, unlike what she does later when she's in the Senate and some of the other political roles she plays, she doesn't really foster collaboration as much as she needs to. And a lot of what happens is hearing behind closed doors, and people just are kind of turned off by the approach that she has taken, by the way that she's kind of dominating this whole approach. But also, again, I think it was the fact that she's about a decade and a half too early, as we see historically. Easy for a historian to say in retrospect, but and part of it, for example, the Catholic Church was very supportive in general of what she was trying to do, but the position of the universal health care that she was promoting was going to allow abortion at a level that the Catholic Church leaders couldn't support. So there was that issue that caused some problems too. But it almost tanked the entire Clinton presidency. I mean, the election, 1994 midterms, the Republicans gained, I forget what it was, 6 seats in the Senate and 54 seats in the House or something like that. First time since 1952, I think it was, that they controlled both branches of Congress. So it was almost a disaster, and people were predicting that Bill was going to lose the 1996 election because of this and other things. But obviously a lot happened in the next 2 years that turned things in a different direction.
Yeah. And in this instance and in others, and we'll get into that more when we talk about the 2016 campaign in particular, she was remarkably tone deaf to a lot of what she was doing. She just didn't have the same political instincts that her husband had, for example. Would you agree?
I would agree. And of course, she didn't have the same charisma that he had. She didn't have the same winsomeness that he had. She was kind of the brains behind the operation. A lot of people have said she was the one who was disciplined, who kept him on track. But yeah, her political instincts have been problematic throughout her career. She could have, I think, won. Probably not in 2008. I don't think she could have got the nomination over Barack Obama. I think he was just too charismatic and too articulate and ran such a great campaign. But clearly she could have won 2016 had her political instincts been better. And I describe a wide variety of reasons why I think she lost 2016. And I put religion as a major factor. But yeah, I think your observation is correct.
You talk about her speech at the University of Texas in April of 1993. Why is that important?
Well, this is her so-called politics of meaning speech. That's not the speech she gave it, the title she gave it, but it was what the media called it. She's really, it was very important because she laid herself out in a way that she hadn't previously done. And she got a lot of negative feedback for it. particularly from the liberal community, because she was advocating spirituality. She was advocating personal responsibility. And after that, she was very gun shy about speaking out, about sharing anything about her personal life or talking about the relationship between spirituality and governance. So it's kind of a setback that handicapped her for a while. And I think, kind of plagued her all the way through even the 2016 election, because she got such negative feedback from so many in regard to that particular speech that she gave. And I don't think we really have the time to go into the particulars of it, but, if people listening would read that section of the book, you'll get an overview of what's involved.
Right. So we come to the second term of the Clinton presidency, and of course, that is defined in many ways by the Monica Lewinsky scandal. And you make the point that at that point, Hillary Clinton really does come to rely on her faith and on the religious counsel that she gets from a number of individuals. Can you say a bit more about that?
Well, absolutely. I think it's fairly well known that Bill, after his infidelity, had several religious leaders, including Tony Campolo, and who counseled him. But Hillary also looked to folks who were Christians for insight, to her former pastor at Little Rock, Ed Matthews, Billy Graham. A lot of people, those two and others, really encouraged her to forgive Bill, which he was having a lot of trouble doing after it became clear that he had indeed had this affair. She had been part of a women's prayer group the entire time she was First Lady, beginning in 1993. And she got tremendous support from that. Most of the other women involved were wives of major politicians. A couple were, one lady in particular was a pastor at McLean Bible Church. But they provided tremendous support. And she said over and over again, I could not have gotten through this and probably would not have stayed with Bill if it had not been for my faith. My faith gave me the energy, gave me the encouragement, gave me the consolation that I needed to be able to remain in the marriage and try to rebuild the marriage and to forgive my husband.
Yeah. And she rebounds by running for Senate in 2000, winning the seat that was previously held by Daniel Patrick Moynihan, and embarks on her own political career. And I think very few people at the time doubted that she would someday set her eyes on the presidency herself. So that campaign was a kind of attempt at rehabilitation and reinvention, would you say?
Absolutely. She had long, I think, wanted a political position herself. She faced tremendous obstacles when she first declared for that Senate race, because she was a carpetbagger. She hadn't lived in New York. She'd established residency, but she wasn't from New York, as we well know. And she was going to be running against Rudy Giuliani, who was a very popular at that point Republican ex-mayor of New York. And it was also the fact that some of her positions were at odds with many of the Democrats in New York, particularly at that point her position on gay marriage. So there were some challenges there, but she was committed to running, and it really did. She was the first former First Lady to ever run for office, and she ended up. Giuliani ended up dropping out of the race because of cancer and some other things, and she ended up beating a Representative Rick Lazio 55 to 43%. So she won decisively in the final analysis, but it looked like it was going to be a close race for a good deal of time. And I talk about how religion played a major role in that election because of her campaigning in churches, particularly Black churches in New York City, and also a couple of religious issues that popped up during the campaign.
So she has a Senate career. She runs for the Democratic nomination in 2008. As you say, she lost to Barack Obama, who was a bit of a juggernaut, I think, at that point. was not going to be defeated, and becomes Obama's Secretary of State, where she works on issues that are important to her for her religious convictions, including issues particularly on women and children, and then launches her own campaign for the nomination and the presidency in 2016. You spent a great deal of time on the 2016 campaign, and I appreciate your doing so. I guess my big question there, well, let me go back. Let me do another question first, or another observation. As I was reading through your account of the 2016 campaign, and I imagined the speeches and the quotations that you cite in your book being attributed to any other person other than Hillary Clinton, we would say that this was probably the most religious, pious person ever to run for the presidency, with the exception, as you say, of Jimmy Carter. But it didn't work. It didn't resonate with voters. What happened in 2016? And let me throw another question out there. Again, you painstakingly go through what happened, and I really appreciate that. But I guess I have to wonder, was there any realistic chance that evangelical voters in particular would have voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016?
Well, just for folks who are listening, Trump got 81% of the evangelical vote and Clinton got 16%, which was a little bit less than Obama got in 2012 and quite a bit less than he got in 2008. So if she had done even as well as he did in 2012, given the number of evangelical voters that are out there, she gotten 4% more, which is what he got, 20%. It might have been enough, given how razor thin the margins were in 3 or 4 of the states that Trump won. I make the case that she made some major mistakes in terms of how she pursued her campaign with regard to religious communities. One of which was she had no liaison to the evangelical community. Another was that she refused offers to be interviewed by Christianity Today and World Magazine and some other major evangelical publications. She refused offers to speak to major evangelical groups. She didn't do enough to encourage them to think that they would have a voice in her administration if she was elected. She didn't pursue enough relationships with them. And these were all things that Barack Obama did in 2008 and 2012. So she had that model in front of her that she could have followed, but she didn't do it. And I also make the case that she didn't do enough to appeal to white Catholic voters either. And had she done more to reach them, she might have won. Part of it was that she didn't connect her policies as explicitly with biblical teaching as she could have, which would have resonated more with evangelicals. Also, there's the issue that she just didn't assure evangelicals enough that she was going to protect their religious freedom, which was something that they were very concerned about in 2016. And Trump did assure them. I don't think there's anything she could have done about Supreme Court justices. She wasn't going to nominate the kind of people that evangelicals wanted in that position. And certainly there wasn't anything specific. Well, with regard to abortion, the argument was that if she had focused more on making it rare and reemphasizing the fact that there were low rates of abortion during the Clinton presidency, and policies that would have reduced teenage pregnancies and encouraged sexual education, parental notification, things like that. So there aren't major things that she could have done that would have, those are fairly major, but if she had done those kind of things, I think she gets that 4 or 5% more, and that's probably enough to win the election. But again, I don't want to say that it's only religious issues that her downfall. There are lots of other things that she did. And I talk about those other issues as well. You know, it was kind of a lackluster campaign. She wasn't personal enough. She didn't really identify a central theme that would resonate with people. If Trump's theme was "Make America Great Again," her theme seemed to be "America's already great," and a lot of particularly white working class men did not identify with that whatsoever. She got crushed. I think it was 73-23 or something like that with white working class men. So, you know, that particular demographic hurt her considerably as well.
You talk about how, you know, again, this is all kind of redoing the campaign and reimagining it, but how she could have benefited with help from people like Jim Wallace and Wes Pippert and Philip Wogeman, Tony Campolo. I was shocked to read that Tony had offered to organize an Evangelicals for Hillary group, and she refused, apparently. That to me is almost inconceivable, but apparently she did. How would she have benefited from that counsel?
Well, I think she would have benefited quite a bit. And he made that offer very public. It was in the Washington Post. So it wasn't something behind closed doors. And in 2008, Ron Sider had headed up a similar group of evangelicals for Barack Obama. And of course, Sider and others did the same thing for Joe Biden in 2020. So again, it seems incomprehensible why she wouldn't take advantage of that. And again, that could have been the 4% that she needed to push her over the edge. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, there were, and I guess I point out in the book, there's another obstacle, and that is the Democratic Party, as opposed to the Republican Party, is a much broader umbrella theologically and religiously. So you've got a much higher percentage of nones in the Democratic Party, that is people with no religious affiliation. You got a much higher percentage of people who think religion should be kept out of political discourse completely. You've got people who are much more on the liberal theological end of the spectrum. And so it's a much harder task for any Democratic candidate to appeal to the various groups within that, under that Democratic umbrella, and not, and her fear was, if I'm too overtly religious, I may turn off some of these other groups and people that I need. But again, I think instructively, Barack Obama, her own husband, Jimmy Carter in 1976, all of them showed that it could be done, and done winningly. But again, I think, as you say, her political instincts could have been better.
Yeah. How did your assessment of Hillary Clinton change over the course of writing this book?
Well, I was at a men's Bible study the other day, and one person said to me, you know, I'm not a fan of Hillary Clinton, but I really enjoyed your book and I learned a lot, and it's kind of changed my perception of her somewhat. And I said, well, just for the record, I'm not a fan of Hillary Clinton either. and having done the book, I'm still not a fan per se, but I really respect her faith. And I think her faith is deep. I think it's meaningful. Of course, one of the main critiques of politicians is that their faith is just disingenuous. It's a ploy that they put on to try to win voters and appear more moralistic than they are, and to show good character and all that kind of things. But I think anybody who reads my book will come away with the perception that her faith was from almost the cradle to now. And it has impact. And there was a period of time, probably law school and right after law school, where she wasn't as involved in prayer, Bible reading, and church as other times. But throughout most of her life, her faith has been her North Star. It has really directed who she is and what she believes and what she does, how she relates to people. And like other people, she's got her character flaws that, kind of turn some people off. And I understand that. And some of them turn me off too. I mean, she's been accused of being self-righteous and smug and thinking she's the smartest person in the room, things of that nature. But I would say that I certainly gained a greater respect for her faith. And as a Christian, I have a deep regard for anyone who tries to apply their faith to their vocation. And I think that she has made a genuine effort to try to do that. And it has been generally effective. But, one of the things you just pointed out was I refer to the four people that you mentioned that she knew, Wallace and Pipperit, and Wogeman and Campolo, who all wrote on this subject about how Christians can apply their faith to politics, all of whom she knew, she had a relationship with, who could have given her more guidance if she had been more amenable to it or seeking of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you also talk about you make a comparison with George McGovern, another Methodist whose faith certainly informed his politics. But you also mentioned Mark Hatfield as being someone who might have whose career was moving in the same direction, many of the same directions that Hillary's career and her politics were directing her, and how he might have provided a nice model for her political engagement. But again, there seems to be no connection there at all.
Right. Of course, she wouldn't have known Hatfield personally, given the differences in age. Well, I shouldn't say that, but if she knew him when she was younger and he was considerably older. So she didn't have the direct connection with him. And by the way, Randall's working on a religious biography of Mark Hatfield, who I admire greatly in many ways. And so I'm looking forward to that book. But I think Hatfield would have been a good example for her. Of course, he never ran for the presidency. So there's
came close. Came close.
There's a pretty big difference there in terms of the constituencies that you're trying to influence.
Right. What is your best guess about what's ahead for Hillary Clinton? Will she simply kind of fade into the background? It's kind of hard to imagine she would do that.
No, I don't think that she will. I think she'll continue. She continues to have op-eds. She had one in 2021 saying Trump should be impeached because of his role in the insurrection, the riot, January 6th. She just had one the other day about the life of Dianne Feinstein. She's going to continue to write. She's going to continue probably to host podcasts. She's a senior statesperson within the Democratic community, and I think she'll continue to be looked to for advice. I mean, there were some people that even were saying that she should be the Democratic candidate in 2024. About 6 months ago, there were some op-eds being written suggesting that. I certainly don't think that's going to happen. And again, she's got the age issue that Trump and Biden have. But I think she'll continue to, and she continues to work through the Clinton Global Initiative and continues to write. So I don't think she's going to fade into the woodwork. I think she'll continue as long as she's mentally and physically healthy to have an influence.
My final question. I don't believe you interviewed Hillary for the book. Is that right?
That is correct. I did not have any particular venue to do that through.
If you could, what would you ask her?
Well, it's one of the things that I thought about was she has been interviewed many, many times about her religious faith and at a fair amount of depth. And she's also spoken at a wide variety of faith forums. So I felt like that many of the questions I would ask she'd already answered. And by the way, she believes in the Trinity. She believes in the bodily resurrection of Christ. She's a pretty orthodox Christian when it comes to the one thing she was accused of was not believing that Jesus is the only way to heaven. But in many other ways, her faith is constant with evangelicals. I guess if I was going to ask her anything, I would ask her this question I've been batting around, and that is, why didn't you pursue the help that was readily available to you that might have helped shape your political philosophy even more in light of biblical teaching, and then would have enabled you to speak even more articulately about these issues?
Might have changed the course of history.
It could have.
Gary, thank you again. This has been wonderful. I think we're going to throw this over to Heather for questions from those who are observing.
Thank you, Randall. I appreciate it very much.
All right, so thank you both for this wonderful conversation. We have one question so far from James Dixon, and they ask, why do white evangelicals continue to demonize Hillary Rodham Clinton? Is it an extension of the old fundamentalist social gospel tension to any extent?
The question was, why do white evangelicals continue to demonize Hillary Clinton?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I have a fair amount in the book about how Hillary is perceived to be the devil. In some polls, when she was running in 2016, it was as high as 18% of people said that she was influenced by the devil, at least. Yeah, I make the case that Hillary is one of the most reviled people in the history of our country. And you've got to have incredibly thick skin to put up with what she said. And if you read my book, you'll get some sense of, I think you get a good sense of the way she has been ridiculed, mocked, scorned. I think evangelicals in particular have been, I think it's ones who particularly see her as an ambassador of abortion. Arguably, she was the most staunch pro-choice candidate to ever run in American history, given her track record, even though she tried to moderate her position at times. So I think that's, for evangelicals who see abortion as the principal issue, and you've got somebody who seems to be promoting it in their minds, then that person is going to be perceived very, very negatively. So I think there's a combination of certain political stances she took, as well as her personality. But again, a lot of it's because of what the media has said about her. If you buy into certain sources, media sources, as a basis of your information, then you're going to get a very negative perception of her. And I appreciate Randall saying that my book is even-handed, because I really do try to point out what both sides say about her. But I can't even imagine, most of us don't take criticism very well. I can't imagine being criticized the way she's been criticized. And I also can't imagine having my marital life portrayed before the public in the way that hers has been. That's just got to be emotionally draining to deal with that whole issue.
All right, so our next question comes from Dwight Lysine, and they ask, do you think there was a disconnect between her character and her words and deeds that may have accounted for her not getting more of the evangelical vote, even without courting it? Also, you mentioned the Russian dossier in the 2016 election that came from her campaign. In some ways, there must have been a two-way interaction such that her politics also impacted her faith, such that at times the ends justified the means, making her good works more akin to a liberation type theology. And I know that was a lot, so let me know if you want me to repeat it.
Sure.
Okay.
Well, I think for everybody who's ever walked the planet, there's a disconnect between our words and our actions. It's inevitable as fallen human beings that we're not going to live up to everything that we say. The main critiques of Hillary are, again, that she has a messianic complex, that she thinks she's smarter than everyone else. She thinks that it's a Manichaean worldview of, Bill and I are good and our opponents are evil. She's been accused of that. She's been accused of being very stubborn, of in some situations not being willing to play well in the sandbox. Ironically, when she was a senator from New York, she crossed the aisle many times and supported legislation with many Republicans, and was highly esteemed by most of her colleagues. So depends on the setting, I guess. But yeah, she's certainly done some things that she regrets, and like all of us who have done things that we regret. So I think it was more the way that her character was portrayed by her opponents, though, than her actual character that was a turnoff to many evangelicals. I think if it was more even-handed reporting or a better understanding of her true character, there might not have been that perception might not have been quite so great. Now, you're going to have to reiterate the second part of that question for me.
Okay. Okay, so they asked, You didn't mention the Russian dossier in the 2016 election that came from her campaign. In some ways, there must have been a two-way interaction, such that her politics also impacted her faith, such that at times the ends justified the means, making her good works more akin to a liberation type theology.
Well, I think we're all, again, as fallen human beings, we let the ends justify the means. I think that one of the issues, critiques of her, is that she would do anything, say anything to get elected, and that she was just so bent on getting the office that she was willing to cut corners and do things that weren't wise. I genuinely believe that, you know, if the title of the book is "Do All the Good You Can," where can you do the most good? As president of the United States, you have a bully pulpit. You have the opportunity. Anything you say is newsworthy. You can promote all kinds of policies, and so that's the ultimate platform for doing all the good you can, is to be president of the United States. So I understand if that's your worldview, why you might want to occupy that position. It does continue to baffle me, given the criticism you're going to face and the incredible responsibilities that you have as president, why anyone would want the job, let alone people at the latter stages of their lives. But people do, because they're convinced that they've got a vision and a platform and an approach that's going to benefit not just the United States, but the world. So I think I'll stop there.
All right, so our next question comes from Anne-Marie Mingo, and she asks, was there anything that you found interesting in your research about Hillary Rodham Clinton's faith formation and life/political choices that you decided to leave out of the final manuscript? If so, why did you make that choice?
Well, there are always things that we have to leave out because publishers say, you know, X number of words is all you're allowed. And I tend to be one of those people that likes to present all sides of things and be as thorough as possible. And I've been accused of overwhelming readers sometimes with too many examples. But nevertheless, I feel like I was able to include almost everything that I wanted to in this particular book about her faith. That is one nice thing about doing a religious biography, is you can focus on one particular dimension of your subject's life and not feel like you have to cover everything. But I feel like if people read the book, they'll gain the sense that her faith is there from, you know, very early on in her life until today, and you can see it over and over again impacting choices that she makes, everyday life, bigger decisions. So I would say no, there is not anything in particular that I feel that I had to leave out.
All right, so our next question comes from Danny Yamashiro, and he asks, how would further discussion with Wallace, Pipert, Wogaman, and Campolo have directed her political philosophy and policy formation? Specifics?
Well, I think that, again, we can't expect presidential candidates or lifelong politicians. We can't expect them to be theologians or Bible scholars. George McGovern is the only candidate for the presidency. Well, no, I guess Al Gore. But anyway, very rarely has a presidential candidate had a seminary education. And most of them did not go to Christian colleges. I think that one thing that Hillary did not do was she didn't really read the literature of the social gospel movement in its heyday or in its more contemporary period of time to know more specifically about the theological underpinning and various actions that those people undertook. But also, again, those four people that I mentioned, I think all wrote instructively and wisely about how Christian faith can undergird a political life, that can undergird everything from what legislation you propose to what political choices that you make, who you appoint to office, how you relate to various constituencies, pretty much every facet of the political realm, these folks have addressed. To my knowledge, and again, if I could have asked a question, Randall, I might have asked this specifically. Did you read any of these books? I've never seen her reference any of them or any books similar to this. And, did she read Mark Hatfield's autobiographies? I said another good source of knowing about how to practice your faith in politics is to read the autobiographies of people who've done it effectively. So again, I don't have time to cite chapter and verse, but I think that had she done that, she would have been more engaged in terms of what Scripture has to say. It is interesting, in her public remarks, she tended to quote Galatians 6:9 about don't grow weary in doing good, or James chapter 2 about the importance of showing your faith by your works. But they said that when she would go into these churches and be in campaigning, if it was whatever the text was for the day, she was typically able to get up without even knowing in advance what it was going to be and talk about it in terms of her own faith life and her own faith journey and her understanding of Scripture. So she had a remarkable understanding of the Bible, and she was truly a student of the Bible, but I just don't think that she applied it quite as directly and as effectively to her political life as she could have. And those men could have helped her as well as other people.
Jimmy Carter, too, for that matter.
Yeah. I think we both made that point about Jimmy Carter, that despite his background, and he's even more so than her. He Sunday school teacher for decades, right? She taught Sunday school some, but he taught it verbatim or on and on and on. Again, Carter could have done more, I think, along that line too.
All right, so it looks like we're just about out of time. Do you have any final thoughts for us?
Well, my final thought would be that it's been a fun project. I think if you read the book, that you'll certainly have things you disagree with. You'll have things you question, but I think that you'll enjoy it, and you'll certainly get a better insight into her life, but also into kind of the events of the last 40 years, in terms of, because she was right at the center of an awful lot of things going on, at least from 1992 to 2016. And we didn't talk about, Randall and I didn't talk about, but the one main thing that she did as Secretary of State was put on the world's agenda helping women and children and trying to make their lives better, arguing that this was a matter of global security and American national security. So anyway, I would just close with that to say that I think if you read the book, you'll learn a lot about what's going on in our world today, as well as how faith impacts one individual and perhaps can impact the rest of us.
And I will second that. It's a wonderful book, wonderful cover, by the way. I think the wonderful photograph, and Gary's done a wonderful job with that. And I'm curious, I expect you've sent her a copy. Will you hear from her?
I didn't personally send her a copy. I guess I'm leaving that to Heather. I
Well, you should.
I would not
I
even
did
know.
send one to the Clinton Foundation.
Well, there we go. Well, thank you, Heather. Appreciate it. Yeah, if I got some feedback, it's tough because I say some things that are pretty negative in there, right? But again, I cite a lot of things that are pretty negative. So I was just thinking, if I was reading a book about me that had that kind of negativity in it, I'm not sure I would reply to the author, but overall, it's a pretty positive assessment, I think.
It's a very fair book. It's really nicely done. Congratulations.
Thank you, Randall. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, audience.
Everyone. Just a reminder, if you want to purchase a copy of the book, you can use promo code GOOD40 on our website to get a 40% off discount. And then you will get an email from me probably tomorrow, I think, and then I will have that discount code in there for you as well. So thank you again to everyone for being here today, and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody. Randall, thank you.
Hey, good job. Great job, Gary. Thank you.